So if you've been following our coverage of the Georgia gubernatorial race, you'd see that there is blatant voter suppression going on because current Secretary of State Brian Kemp is also the Republican nominee for governor in that state, and he's using his power as Secretary of State to suppress the votes of thousands of new voters that Stacey Abrams, his Democratic opponent, is registering. And the plot keeps thickening here because we're finding out more and more as more journalists investigate the situation and the extent to which Brian Kemp is a fraud. It was massively understated in our previous videos because we have some more news about this individual and just how blatant he is at trying to suppress the vote. Now, originally, we know that he placed 50,000 new voter registrations on hold, but the good news is that a judge moved to block them from doing this. However, there is some bad news because we're learning that the number of votes that he is suppressing is actually closer to 340,000. And as Peter Wade of Rolling Stone reports, Republican gubernatorial candidate and current Georgia Secretary of State Brian Kemp incorrectly canceled some 340,000 voter registrations, according to a recent investigation. Although Kemp claimed the voters left the state of Georgia or moved to another country, they hadn't. Greg Palast, who filed the suit against Kemp, wrote in Truthout. And additionally, as Bob Brigham of Raw Story explains, yet another voter suppression scandal in Georgia was reported by the New York Times on Thursday. The Democratic Party of Georgia reportedly submitted over 4,700 vote-by-mail applications in DeKalb County, but the Elections Board could only confirm receiving 48 requests. So, conspicuously enough, his office just so happened to lose more than 4,000 vote-by-mail applications. And also, simultaneously, they are trying to suppress more than 300,000 voters. I mean, he's suppressing the vote in such a brazen way. He's not even trying to be inconspicuous, and he won't resign. There's been a lot of individuals now across the country that have called on him to resign because there's this huge conflict of interest if you are supposed to uphold the integrity of the election that you're running in. If you're going to be Secretary of State while you're running in this election, that's unacceptable. So at least step down from your position as Secretary of State and let someone else take over, because odds are you're going to find another Republican crony that's going to do your bidding anyway. But he won't even do that. And it's gotten so bad that former President Jimmy Carter has even come out and called on him to resign, saying, quote, "In Georgia's upcoming gubernatorial election, popular confidence is threatened not only by the undeniable racial discrimination of the past and the serious questions that the federal courts have raised about the security of Georgia's voting machines, but also because you are now overseeing the election in which you are a candidate." Carter added, "In order to foster voter confidence in the upcoming election, which will be especially important if the race ends up very close, I urge you to step aside and hand over to a neutral authority the responsibility of overseeing the governor's election." And when you look at Real Clear Politics public opinion poll aggregate data, you'll see that Stacey Abrams, for a red state like Georgia, she's right behind him. They're essentially polling within the margin of error. So he's absolutely terrified, and he's pulling out all the stops, and he's playing dirty. Last week on the program, we played some audio of him essentially admitting that all of these new voter registrations is a concern to him. And at this point, he knows that the only way he's going to win is to get dirty and suppress the vote. Now, I don't understand why, if you are worried about other voters registering to vote, you don't just try to register more Republican voters, more new Republican voters. But he knows that Democrats, they will win if they, in fact, expand the electorate, whereas Republicans, they have to rely on the voting base that is relatively reliable, that always comes out to vote. They're always going to have about the same amount of voters come out and support them. So really, each election across the country, it doesn't matter to the state, is going to hinge on how successful their opponents' get out the vote campaign is. And Stacey Abrams is very successful at getting out the vote. Now understand, of those 53,000 voter registrations that he put on hold, 70% of them is voters of color. Now, why would someone like Brian Kemp have an interest in specifically suppressing voters of color? Well, it's obvious. By and large, Republicans do not get votes from people of color. Those individuals are more often than not going to vote for Democrats. So what he's doing is he's targeting voters of color, new registrations, because he knows that's exactly what is going to be his ticket to victory, and it's absolutely disgusting. And I've said this once, I'm going to say it again, there should be national outrage. And what we're seeing here, voter suppression, it's on display perhaps more so than ever. This isn't some kind of new phenomenon, I don't want to imply that, but we're seeing it on full display here. I think more so than in recent years. You see Chris Kobach in Kansas doing this, you see Nevada doing this. The state of Texas, you see voting machines switching votes, and the Republican Party is claiming that they don't have the authority to do anything about it. Look, if Republicans pull out a victory, if for some reason the blue wave is suppressed, we know it'll be in part due to voter suppression tactics, because if you're a Republican and you're worried about winning, you cheat. They're proving this to us time and again, and it's completely unacceptable and downright disturbing, quite frankly.
Support this podcast by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Humanist Report.